Even those with just a peripheral interest in unbelief will be familiar with the so-called four horsemen of new atheism: Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens. What many people don't know is that there was supposed to be a fifth. Prevented from attending at the last minute by an emergency in Holland, Somalian-born ex-Muslim Ayaan Hirsi Ali had originally been scheduled to join their company. We can perhaps be somewhat grateful for her absence, at least insofar as it permitted this iconic moniker, the Four Horsemen, to enter the cultural lexicon. The Five Pillars, suggested as an alternative label for the complete group, would perhaps have been a little bit too crude. Now, though, it seems, Ayaan may herself have good reason to thank Providence that she couldn't attend this legendary meeting, as the unshakable reputation it stamped onto those who did would have now made for something of an awkward branding crisis for the group. After all, such a numerical designation, as was given to this collective, relies on a sort of confidence in the continued allegiance of its members to remain in serious use, and this horsewoman of the counter-apocalypse announced in a surprise essay last week that she has embraced Christianity, and she's done so in such a fashion that, if we really must talk in terms of point scoring, it's difficult to tell if this is more of a win for the Christians or for the atheists. This is because, amongst a predictably electric series of reactions online, perhaps the most common objection to Ayaan's article has been its rather conspicuous lack of, well, arguments for the existence of God, or the truth of Christianity. Instead, the essay is dedicated to culture. Western civilization is under threat, she writes. What unites us, she asks. How might we fill the nihilistic vacuum that atheism cultivates? Indeed, reading an essay in which Osama bin Laden, Richard Dawkins, and Vladimir Putin are all mentioned exactly as many times as Jesus Christ is, that is, once, tends to give the impression that this conversion story has less to do with what Christianity affirms, and more to do with certain social threats that Ayaan has come to believe Christianity can negate. Now, just quickly, do you ever think about how you come to learn of these social debates, and how you analyze the information contained in them? We live in a time of, shall we say, low trust in mainstream news, with bias and misinformation abounding. That's why I'm thrilled to welcome back Ground News as the sponsor of this video. Ground News aggregates stories from thousands of local and international outlets in one place, so you can compare the reporting. Take a look. I can search for, say, religion as a topic and find stories like this one. A high school coach in Georgia has been removed after hosting a baptism ceremony for 20 of his players. Perhaps the most important thing is I can see that of all the reported sources, just 10% of them were left-leaning and 60% were right-leaning. This means that if you only read left-wing news, you could miss this story altogether. I can also see a factuality rating for the sources and even who owns them. I can also compare the different headlines, which can often vary by political leaning. Ground News' blind spot feature is tailored to help you see this kind of news that you might otherwise miss, organized by political leaning. A genuinely unique feature and one of the best things about Ground News. Cut through the media bias and get to the truth. Go to ground.news/AlexOC to stay fully informed. And sign up with my link this month only to get 40% off unlimited access. So let's take a look at Ayaan's article. She writes, "Why do I call myself a Christian now? Part of the answer is global. Western civilization is under threat from three different but related forces." She explains that these are China, Russia, and global Islamism. "We endeavor," she continues, "to fend off these threats with modern secular tools. Military, economic, diplomatic, and technological efforts to defeat, bribe, persuade, appease, or surveil. And yet, with every round of conflict, we find ourselves losing ground. We're either running out of money with our national debt in the tens of trillions of dollars, or we're losing our lead in the technological race with China." Strange problems to be discussing in an essay that many would have expected to be at least a touch theological in focus. She continues, "But we can't fight off these formidable forces unless we can answer the question, what is it that unites us? The response that God is dead seems insufficient. So, too, does the attempt to find solace in the rules-based liberal international order. The only credible answer, I believe, lies in our desire to uphold the legacy of the Judeo-Christian tradition." So, a thoroughly secular conversion? Perhaps not. Ayaan goes on to say, "Yet I would not be truthful if I attributed my embrace of Christianity solely to the realization that atheism is too weak and divisive a doctrine to fortify us against our menacing foes, as if atheism is itself an identifiable doctrine, and even if it is, that it has somehow proved to be a more divisive one than, Christianity. But at least now she says she has another reason to be Christian, not just that of finding an effective way to combat our political foes. What is this reason? I have also turned to Christianity because I ultimately found life without any spiritual solace unendurable, indeed very nearly self-destructive. Atheism failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and purpose of life? This is perhaps a more familiar sentiment. Turning to religion as an escape hatch from nihilism is a common story, though I must say one which might help the atheist establish his case. Atheists must account for the existence and prevalence of religious belief, and one popular explanation is that religion is a social system invented to provide comfort to a planet of confused apes trying to make sense of the senseless and accidental fact of their own existence, and nothing more. This thesis is, of course, quite difficult to prove, but accounts of people converting to theism explicitly because life without it feels devoid of meaning hardly counts against it. Ayaan writes that atheism failed to answer what is the meaning and purpose of life, but it sounds more like she's decided that it did answer the question, just that it answered it with a resounding nothing, and, unable to accept this, she felt attracted to Christianity. But maybe not. Maybe we can find a plausible argument here for God's existence. We may simply accept as a premise that life must have meaning, perhaps evidenced in part by our very desire for meaning, and that since only something non-natural can give us this meaning, the supernatural must exist. C.S. Lewis famously wrote in Mere Christianity, "Most people, if they really had learned to look into their own hearts, would know that they do want, and want acutely, something that cannot be had in this world. There are all sorts of things in this world that offer to give it to you, but they never quite keep their promise." And later, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." This so-called argument from desire indicates the falsity of atheism in its failure to satisfy a desire that almost everybody has within them for something more, since it seems utterly mysterious why this desire should exist at all if that which we seek doesn't even exist. There's a lot to say about this argument, of course, but I won't go on here, mostly because I don't actually think that Ayaan was intending us to read such an argument into her words. Why? Well, immediately following this, Ayaan writes that where atheism promised of an age of reason and intelligent humanism, it actually left a void to be filled by a jumble of irrational and quasi-religious dogma involving modern cults engaging in virtue-signaling theatre. She then writes, "In this nihilistic vacuum, the challenge before us becomes civilizational. We can't withstand China, Russia, and Iran if we can't explain to our populations why it matters that we do. We can't fight woke ideology if we can't defend the civilization that it is determined to destroy. And we can't counter Islamism with purely secular tools. To win the hearts and minds of Muslims here in the West, we have to offer something more than videos on TikTok." So, notice this. Ayaan wrote that it would not be truthful to attribute her embrace of Christianity solely to the realization that atheism can't fortify us against our menacing foes. There's more. Atheism also can't tell us what the meaning of life is. She then says that because of this nihilism, we can't withstand China, Russia, and Iran. So, in attempting to offer a reason for adopting Christianity other than fortifying us against our foes, she has immediately circled right back around to fortifying us against our foes. That's all this is about. Is it really that untruthful to say that her conversion was solely due to this consideration? And this is what seems to have kindled such a critical reaction from some commentators. Can a conversion to Christianity really be so insensitive to the truth claims of Christianity? Is it even possible to simply adopt a theological worldview just because you prefer its ethical values in the geopolitical landscape? And this isn't something only being asked by atheists, by the way. If you believe in the truth of Christianity as a philosophical and historical fact, then what can you make of a conversion story like this one that doesn't seem to consider that a relevant factor? One atheist, Richard Dawkins, in an open letter to Hirsi Ali, had the following to say: "Dear Ayaan, as you know, you are one of my absolutely favourite people, but seriously, Ayaan, you, a Christian? You are no more a Christian than I am." Interestingly, this is something that Ayaan appears to agree with, but in the exact opposite direction. In a recent discussion, Ayaan had this to say about Dawkins.
I was called a Christian by Roger Scruton in 2008, and I said, Roger, no, I'm not a Christian. And he said, but you act like a Christian, and you behave like a Christian, therefore you are a Christian. And I think that's exactly what I would like to say to Richard Dawkins. It's, you act like, I've been to, choral music with him, which he enjoys very much. And he's one of the most Christian people I know.
So, quite strangely, both Richard Dawkins and Ayaan Hirsi Ali seem to agree that they are about as Christian as each other. How can that possibly be the case if they, fundamentally disagree about the truth of Christianity? Well, I think that demonstrated in this is a fundamental disagreement about what religion is. Is religion a set of propositional truth claims? Or is it more like something that you act out? This particular debate has been inflamed in recent years by the influence of Jordan Peterson, who is famously difficult to pin down about his religious beliefs, but one thing he does consistently suggest is that what we believe might be better indicated by how we behave, not what we say we think is true. And there's definitely some wisdom in this. I mean, if I told you that I'm not at all superstitious, but then you saw me avoiding walking under a ladder, you might have good reason to think that I'm a little more superstitious than maybe even I would realize, or at least like to admit. If, however, like me, you grew up on a diet of new atheism, you'll probably instantly prefer the former characterization. Religion is about truth claims. Of course, religion makes truth claims. Jesus died on a cross. The Jews escaped slavery in Egypt. There exists an actual real person called God. And to say that you can be a Christian without believing these things seems ridiculous. Okay, sure, but the real issue seems to be that even if we accept the Petersonian line that religion is more about the way you behave than about any of its truth claims, Ayaan appears, at least here, to suggest that Richard Dawkins is essentially a Christian because he likes choral music.
I've been to, choral music with him, which he enjoys very much. And he's one of the most Christian people I know.
Well, I think that this is probably supposed to serve as just one example amongst a host of activities that she sees Richard Dawkins partaking in and thinking that these are somehow influenced by Christianity. She appears to have been greatly influenced lately by Tom Holland, whose enormously successful Dominion has convinced a lot of people that what we call secular Western values are in fact indebted to a uniquely Christian tradition. She talks about this in her essay. But here, as it were, is the rub. There is a crucial difference between the recognition of Christian influence over our culture and many of our values and the recognition of the truth of Christianity. For example, Tom Holland himself was, when I last checked at least, not a Christian. And so when Ayaan writes about Western values finding their roots in the Christian tradition and that atheists have failed to understand this connection, she could be absolutely 100% correct and still not have entailed anything about the truth of Christianity. But okay, trying to be really charitable here, perhaps the argument might go something like this. Premise 1, Western values are true in the sense of being morally correct. Premise 2, Western values are Christian. Therefore, Christianity is correct. This is about as close as I think we can get to an argument for the truth of Christianity from this essay. But of course, even this can only work if Christianity is nothing more than a set of values, which is to say, nothing more than just the principles according to which you live your life. Here's maybe the biggest issue. Suppose that I agree with absolutely everything in this essay. Everything. Yes, Western civilization is under threat, and we can't resist China, Russia, and Iran without adopting a unifying set of religious values. And heck, I'll even grant that these values have to be Christian. I'll agree that without God there is only nihilism, and no secular attempt to overcome this can ever be successful. I'll agree that without a meaningful religious story behind our civilization, its erosion is inevitable. I'll agree with all of it. Here's the question. Am I a Christian now? I certainly don't feel like one when I adopt this mindset, but if I'm still not, then what exactly in any of that explains the title of Ayaan's essay, which, after all, isn't called The Supremacy of Christian Values or Why I Wish I Were a Christian. No, it's called Why I Am Now a Christian. Now, to be clear, I think it's generally quite inappropriate to try to gatekeep religious beliefs. "You're not really a Christian" is something I would never like to say to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, or anybody else for that matter. And in fact, I have no problem affirming that she is a Christian. I hope you don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. What I'm trying to express is that if she is indeed a Christian, she appears to be so for reasons that are more or less insensitive to the truth of Christianity.
And so now I can say I am proudly of Judeo-Christian religion without having to waste your time about, do I really think that the world was built in 6 days? Do I really believe every word in the Bible? No, but I do believe that that's Judeo-Christian tradition, and what it has brought forth is, those are the values that I aspire to, the values by which I live.
One thing I want to ask is whether any of this should really come as any surprise. After all, when I hear a story of conversion from atheism to Christianity, it very rarely begins with premise 1. Instead, I usually expect to hear some kind of narrative, maybe involving some personal struggle overcome with Christianity, or some kind of religious experience, perhaps even an encounter with Jesus. And opening Christian scripture, you'll be hard-pressed to find anything resembling a syllogism, indeed, a testament to Christianity that contained no arguments or deductions, but instead relies solely on narrative, or appeal to its superior culture, or its efficacy in combating nihilism, is as much a characterization of the Bible itself as it is Ayaan's article. And yet, even if religious conversions do usually have more to do with experience than with argument, you might still expect that this experience is one involving God, or Christ specifically, or perhaps an encounter with the Holy Spirit. But whereas God appeared in a dream to Zacharias and to Joseph, it appears that Vladimir Putin has appeared in a nightmare to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and it's this, a distinctly more time-sensitive and political rather than transcendent and theological experience, that has catalyzed her adoption of the Christian religion. Look, I can understand if it really is the case that Christian values are necessary to fend off existential threats, why a society might have good reason to adopt those values. But if it is possible, as Ayaan's case appears to show that it is, for a person to actually call themselves a Christian after simply aligning themselves with these values, absent any relevance of the existence of God, or, say, the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus, then I think we've uncovered some evidence for a controversial hypothesis that many of those celebrating Ayaan's conversion would probably wish to resist: that religion is something you do, not something that's true. Thanks for watching.